idea of how difficult it is to be a child in Wales trying to learn Welsh. This is the name of one train station. Llan, Fire, Pwlch, Gwyn, Gylch, Gogeri, Chwelyn, Drobwch, Llanty, Siro, a Gogogoch. Thank you very much. Round of applause, please. Obviously you need to know the translation of what I've been talking about. What this means is St. Mary's Church in the hollow of the White Hazel, near a rapid whirlpool, and the Church of the St. Cecilio of the Red Cave. Now, if you're late for your train and you're asking for some directions, you're going to miss that train. So that's just an idea of the complexity of the land of the when I come to the land of the I'm here to say thank you to Annie, a woman with a great heart, a great union heart, been a great friend, always a pleasure to deal with, and always saying, what can I do to help? And I really appreciated her help when I was trying to understand the new FNV, and I was so pleased that she managed to give me a day or half a day with Tan at the time, where he talked about all the complexities of the Parliament, and I had the opportunity to address the Parliament not so long ago. In trying to make sense of one's life, I just retired 2 weeks ago, and I suppose Annie will be asking herself the same question. Just a little story, and don't count. I know Kathleen is always so worried, because when you have a train station as long as that, Welsh people do have a possibility, a tendency to speak too long. So this is off the clock at the moment. I was in the United States recently. I've been invited by Cornell University to talk to a lot of students about the work of the global unions. And I noticed in my trip into town that day that in Ithaca there was a statue in the town. And it was a statue of Martin Luther King. And it said, this statue is to mark the speech that he gave that day in Ithaca. And I tried to find the place where he made the speech, and it was actually in a church. And so rather like this, I found the church, and this feels like, I went up to the pulpit, and on the back of me there was a little sign that says, it is from this pulpit that Martin Luther King gave a speech about the completeness of life. And then the church being emptied, I did use some quotes from Martin Luther King to get a sense about I have a dream and free at last and so forth. And I thought I must look into this speech about the completeness of life, because I was trying to make sense of the life that I'd led for 40 years in the trade union movement, as Annie would as well. And I looked into this speech, and it's very helpful, Annie. I ask you to read it. And he talks about the completeness of life having 3 dimensions. Its length, its breadth, and its height. And when he talked about length, it wasn't just about the length of life in years and months and days. He talked about the purpose, and not just accepting who you are, but what you were called to do and set out to do with all your strength and power in your system. The purpose of life. And I think, Annie, you ticked the box. You did. He talked about the breadth of life, which is the outward concern for the welfare of other people, looking out for others. And he says, a man has not begun to live until he can rise above the narrow confines of his own individual concerns to the broader concerns of all humanity. Annie, you did. And then he talked about the height of life, and he talked about his belief being accompanied by God, his belief in the Bible and the gospel and the example of God. And I don't know what your beliefs are, Annie, because we never had a conversation about Christianity. But I know that you have a belief in solidarity, you have a belief in people, in community, that we're stronger together in unions and NGOs and building those alliances. And therefore, Annie, you were a believer in this movement, and you contributed to this movement. Therefore, according to the Martin Luther King benchmark of the completeness of life, Annie, you get 100%. That's a good start. I'm pleased about that. It's meant to flatter you. I hope you feel good. Thank you. Now your husband is there, and you can understand the context of what I'm saying as well. So when we turn to the consideration of the future of work, I ask this question also. What will it take for people to lead a complete life? To realize their calling? That will there be in a community that will offer a helping hand to them? that they themselves can contribute a helping hand to others, and above all, can they still believe in a sense of what the common good is, about our common humanity and comradeship and togetherness, and a belief that life can improve. And then Keynes asked himself the question, the great economist. And in the 1930s, he wrote a letter to his grandchildren, and he said, this world economy by this period now would be 4 times richer, and he was correct. And he said we should expect, therefore, to be working no more than 17 hours a week. But he also said, how can we, in this completeness of life, live a life wisely, agreeably, and well? And when I listen to David today, and we represent the retail workers and those logistics workers, he talked of fissures. And Alison and her eloquence spoke about a world of fracture, and this is the world of fracture that we see. Now, Martin Luther King also said that our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. And the organization should speak up about the things that matter. And our political friends have stayed silent for too long about the state of the world that it is in. And they have to reconnect with this world of work and the day-to-day concerns of people. Guy Ryder, Luke is here, chairman of the governing body. Guy, English, is like me, very understated and shy and quiet. And even he now talks about a new brutalism in this world. Climate fractures, inequality fractures, economic ideology fractures, a business model fracture, and let's say this, we have digi-capitalists. We've given too much of a kind eye to these new players, the FANGs, the Facebooks and others. Behind them is an ideology which is an economic one, an ideology, I would say, which is not in solidarity. They are in it for themselves, the greed model in action. With artificial intelligence, we have the potential of a civilization fracture. People are talking about the singularity when AI develops to such an extent that it's beyond human capacity and maybe even comprehension. Then we have the democratic fracture of the Cambridge Analytica case, the manipulation. They know what they are doing, the manipulation of our people to think and act and respond in particular ways. People get a chemical rush when that like button lights up on their Facebook page. We have an issue here about manipulation at the highest level, and these are the fractures which we need to talk about. And then a best-selling novelist really said, the way the world is going, we're going to be divided between the gods who have access to the artificial intelligence and their own human augmentation, and useless people, and they're the terms that we use, useless people. So, our movement, we have to dream again. We have to think of the long future and the big now. And we have to reconnect with the dreams of our movement and what we're all about. And we have to be clear in the message that we take to people about living wisely, agreeably, and well. We are in a digital revolution. They've called it the 4th Industrial Revolution. Call it what you will. This is an age of transformation built on a capitalistic model of exploitation. The world's problems are not solved. The world's problems are not solved. There will always be work to do. In this period of transformation, it's not the union movement that is saying this, but it is the universities and the think tanks and others, and they say the impact of the digital revolution of AI and robotics on people. And they've come up with some numbers, and the numbers are quite startling. The OECD is the latest. 40% of all jobs in the OECD could be replaced by robotics, AI, or whatever. And they say that 32% of all those jobs in the OECD, and we're talking about the most powerful economies here, will be subject to change. McKinsey came up with figures, and we can challenge their figures, saying that 5% of all jobs will be wiped out in the immediate future. But then they say, well, at least between 75 and 350 million people will have to change jobs completely. And then they also say that up to 800 million people will need new skills to work and to be able to thrive in this new context. So we have to take these figures of quantity and quality seriously, the hollowing out of the middle class, the division between the high paid and those at the lower end of the scale. And then at the same time understand that only 50% of the world's population is connected to the internet. So this revolution is still to hit them. And when the ILO Commission, this is a commission being established on the future of work, Luke is a member and I'm a member, and also with the CWA union in India, we are the three union voices there. When we look at this transformation and what it means and the implications that are there, we also come to one very clear conclusion of a chronic underinvestment in people. If you look at wage share, we're not getting a fair shake. If you look at the hours worked, unfair. If you look at the working conditions, if you look at how the wages that we earn are spent, when we look at education and training, the treatment of women in the workforce, if you look at the amount of spend that governments make in those policies which are meant to help people, they are throwing pennies at the problem. Pennies. The average spend on active labour market policies in the OECD is 0.6% of the GDP. So therefore, where do we go from here, and what are the issues at stake that we have to deal with, and what's the kind of lines of action that we're trying to make in the ILO Global Commission, which will be reporting in January. It's the centenary of the ILO next year, and this is at the heart of their centenary celebrations. So what is it? What are those big messages that we're trying to get across in that kind of special place? That this is about the future of social justice, and therefore it's about the future of peace. We managed in these big global declarations that Alison referred to get messages like, leave no one behind. They actually said this at the G20. Trump and his Minister of Labour, whatever he was called, well then was, leave no one behind. 2015, we have a roadmap, Sustainable Development Goals, climate change, Paris, just transition. We have this sense of a roadmap which is being ignored. So we have to stay on this big message in terms of the narrative that we are presenting. We also have the global deal sponsored by the Swedish Prime Minister, now housed at the OECD. And this is another way of trying to change the narrative that the only way that we can solve these global fractures is a healing process based on union recognition and dialogue. We have to say that when we look at these numbers and the figures that we are dealing with here and the transformations, business leaders themselves and governments will admit that we are not prepared for the nature and the depth of the challenges which we have. It reminds me of a story of an American tourist that was in Dublin trying to find his way to Tipperary. And he asked a local and said, how do I get to Tipperary from here? And he said, well, if I was you, I wouldn't start from here. And that's where we are when we're considering on the future of work. We have to get a sense of the big picture, and we are pushing hard in this commission to have a sense of what is beyond GDP. How do we measure economic success and social success? That we need a new economics. And we have to stress once again the importance of working people's lives. We talked about the commodification, but when we spoke about work in the Declaration of Philadelphia, we talked about the spiritual side of work, that people should be fulfilled. We have to be much stronger on trying to change the business model of big business, to change laws about fiduciary duty. We have to change this notion away from shareholder value, and there are those that say it. Some big investors like Larry Fink says, I'm not investing unless a company has a social purpose. We are making inroads when it comes to the treatment of human rights, not in these big IT carriers, I admit, for the moment. But nevertheless, we have to sharpen our criticism of what this business model means. And it's not going to get to the big future for mankind if this continues. When it comes to inequality and the threats to inequality, how many times do you and I listen to government and business saying, we're not sure how we got here or what the solutions are? We know organisation, collective bargaining and gathering people around those instruments and institutions, if we're given the opportunity to organise and to negotiate, we can begin to reduce the inequality gap. We have to be clear about where we think the jobs of tomorrow will be and what those jobs should look like. And it's clear there is massive potential in care, in the green economy and in infrastructure. In building this narrative, and we've said this in the Commission, we have to be very clear about what we consider unacceptable forms of work. where we just say, no, this is not acceptable. As a government, whatever your political colour is, there are forms of work which are unacceptable. That we need to adapt our social safety nets, and then also to improve the investment in people, in active labour market, policies and workforce development. And I could go on, but I think it's really important for us that in this process that we are in, that we are able to capture another kind of a vision about what this world should look like and how it should be for working people. And in that message also, we have to be, all of us, have to become feminists in our action, in our thoughts, in our policies, and in our action. The advocacy of women's rights on the ground for equality of the sexes is important, and we've seen that there are so many opportunities, economic and otherwise, being lost. When it comes to the union policy contours, what can we do? We are not to be defeatist and say we can't do something about this. Facebook is too big, Google and all the others, they're so powerful and manipulative, but people will pay attention to us. That we have to make a noise. That we have a chance for the left to reconnect with this world of work. That we have to do the risk analysis of what it means to jobs in our sectors. We have to make the scenarios as to how those scenarios will play out unless things aren't done. Let's define what we mean by unacceptable work. When it comes to the economy, let's look at the power and where the power is. We have new monopolies in place. We've let this happen. We have 5 major companies that dominate the digital world. A century ago, FDR and others at the turn of the last century, Sherman and others talked about the tyranny of economic monopoly. And once again, we have to address ourselves to this. We have the ethical agenda on the union side. Am I going on too long? Am I okay? Sorry. So I think we have to look once again at this, the implications of economic concentration, and not be frightened or fearful of taking on this new structure of capital. We have an ethical agenda that we can develop with workers' data, data protection, the value of data and artificial intelligence, where we say humans should be in control. We can't just let these things happen. And we have to make it clear that digital rights are human rights. The collective bargaining agenda, where we can, is perfectly set, and works councils and having voices on supervisory boards for dealing with transformation, negotiating the algorithms and working time, the right to disconnect, and above all, sending a message to business. They know, they are saying, privately and otherwise, 25% of my workforce doesn't have the skills to do the job. Then we have to say to them, you have to keep those people in employment and train them and adapt them for the new skills. That there should be, once again, this effort to keep people in work. We have a legal agenda to develop in terms of misclassification and what that means. And we can regulate the platforms. I think we have some of these platforms on the back foot. And therefore we have to work with the regulatory agents, local municipalities and government to ensure that these legal rights are recognised and done. Also, as unions taking things to our own hands, I can tell you that I have a report here which we presented to our Union World Congress about organising in the digital economy. We are doing it. About using the digital tools. Unions are using them. Using collective bargaining structures and also developing new approaches. We are not asleep at the wheel. We are beginning to see the groundswell, this movement of unions to adapt and to seek to develop their influence. We know in the social media world, we can organise in the social media world. The Writers Guild East in New York has doubled its membership in 2 years. Why? Because they've negotiated and got collective bargaining rights. In the worst place to get negotiation rights, in the USA, in social media. We had 0 union membership in ICT in Romania. Today we have 5,000 of them signed up with a proper organising campaign which we work closely together with. Freelancers. I mean, the world of Hollywood is the freelance model covered with a collective agreement. The directors, the writers, east and west, the film technicians, the actors, the musicians, they have freelance contracts within a framework. They are freelance, yes, but it's done within a collective bargaining framework. It can be done. Organising freelancers in the UK can be done. Independent television now, they have a collective agreement for all those freelancers. On platforms, I think we were taken off balance by these platforms, and the venture capitalists were spinning a yarn about this being different and so on and so forth. And many politicians swallow the pill that this is a new form of work, self-employment, when as David showed, this is an absolute manipulation. So we begin to see different kind of movements taking place. I know in the UK they're not part of the TUC, but it's an independent union for riders out there doing the work. You have your riders union here. There's been movements in Germany, in France, and Italy, and Spain, where these riders quite simply are getting together, creating their cells, creating their guilds, and we have to find a way to help them. We try to give Uber a bloody nose, because I'm bloody fed up, and therefore now Uber has now produced an article about the social protection of drivers. And they're now talking about, well, we need to have drivers who will be able to talk to other drivers about their concerns. I said, I can solve your problem. They're called shop stewards. So there's our unions. Are we organising? Yes. If I look at some of our unions in retail, some of our big unions have to sign up nearly 100,000 members a year just to stand still. And that's the tragedy of it, with this turnover that we see and the job hopping and all the rest of it. Signing up 100,000 to grow by one. Our unions are signing members up. In the United States of America last year, 262,000 new members signed up net, 85% of them young people. I could go on, but nevertheless, I will conclude there, not to run out of your patience. In conclusion, then, the ILO Commission on the Future of Work has been established because it's the centenary of the ILO. And Luke and I, when we look at the current context of populism, of Trumpism, of Duterteism, the rise of the right in all our European countries, threatening the very social fabric that we have, it's time to recall, and we've done this in the Commission, why was the ILO brought into existence in the first place? Because of war, because of 41 million casualties as a result of the First World War, and because of a collapse in the order, a collapse in understanding between peoples. And there was a call, and it was union leaders at that time that wrote the first constitution of the ILO, and then the ILO came into existence. And they said at that time, poverty anywhere is a threat to prosperity everywhere. They said that labour is not a commodity. So we look at this Future of Work Commission not just as a kind of technical issue to deal with the technologies and the digital changes and corrupt economic ideologies. It's about who we are as a humanity and a civilization, needing to live together, to live with one another and to understand with one another. And that we say clearly there's no social justice, there's no peace. And there's no unions, there's no social justice, and there's no peace. So therefore, for the completeness of life for all of us, we need those strong unions, we need the sense of justice, and we need that sense of peace. For the completeness of our union life, we need to secure for us and apply ourselves in terms of organising. That we have to reconnect with all workers and not be categorised as only taking care of those people in work for the breadth, and also to be unshakable in our belief about what we can do. And as Mandela said, it always seems impossible until it's done. Annie, you and I, our time has come. Our time to move on, but to stay connected. But everybody else behind, they have to show once again that it's not impossible until it's done.